I was really intrigued by Kim's son and the issue there. And I don't remember if you actually said this when you were on the stage, Kim, but you said it to me before. And his question was that market research isn't relevant, or his point was, are we relevant? And if so, how do we make sure that the people, the consumers, recognize us as being relevant? How do we make sure the industry and marketers make sure that we are relevant? How do we stay relevant? So, are we? Anyone? I'm not going to call names. This will be interactive.
I think we are relevant, but we're quickly becoming challenged to stay abreast of relevancy in the business world. That there's so much happening now, and if we don't evolve, if we don't, as an industry, change, when we see the kinds of challenges that everybody has put together, whether it's asking the right questions, whether it's the frameworks that we're going to deliver value in, whether it's cooperation on consistency in metrics that are meaningful, or data transparency, so that there's interoperability. I mean, all of those things come together to challenge the relevance, because if we continue to fragment, we will become irrelevant. So,
how else are we going to be able to? How else are our brands going to know really why, to a degree of science, what their customers are doing, is valid? How do you get inside that mindset without facilitating that two-way dialogue? And no matter what algorithms are out there or amazing ways to get at big data or behavioral analysis, I just don't see a world where you don't need to facilitate that two-way dialogue and have that be a significant part of your decision criteria you use to go forward as a business.
Yeah, let me say, maybe we're using a different word. What I think, because I agree with you, you're always going to have the why. You're going to have to answer the why, right, in order to deliver really value. What I'm concerned about is maybe it's not irrelevancy, but being marginalized. That's perhaps maybe the more appropriate term, when others can come in and layer on top that kind of information agnosticism and pull in the data that we provide and deliver on the answer. That's perhaps maybe what I'm more worried about. And in losing that seat at the table, that's where we become either marginalized or irrelevant.
Yeah, I think the challenge, as I was talking about, my talk is about speed, is that the world is definitely moving faster and faster, and if research delivers after a month or 2 months, it used to deliver after 6 months, and now it can deliver after a month or 2 months, and it can deliver a lot quicker. But that oftentimes is not even fast enough, and that what ends up happening, you get marginalized because people need the answers like right away, and you end up having to go with something that people know isn't pure research. It's not as good, but my choice is I'm going to go with no information, or I'm going to go with this kind of not as good research. And so I think the challenge is how do we build systems that allow us to act quickly, and in some cases you do really deep research and you do really, really good research, but you also have to be able to do lightweight research as well and promote that as being good enough in a lot of cases.
Well, I'll pick up on where I left the conversation with my son. The reason he said you're irrelevant, you guys don't get it, was basically around the fact that he saw too much going on around filling in scorecards, making product decisions, market entry decisions, and his point was really about the fact that you're not doing stuff that's deep enough to really understand human motivation, to be able to think about what that means in the future, what's relevant in terms of all the data that needs to come together, but helping companies get ahead of the curve and anticipate where consumers are going. So if you're not having the conversation in the moment, digesting it in a way that you can figure out what that means for the future, and you continue along the path that you are, I'm really not interested in participating. So I think one of the points that Andrew made is very relevant here. If you think about interacting with a 25-year-old in a bar and actually observing what they're doing and not asking from a questionnaire later, or sitting in a car with a 40-year-old and understanding why that Corvette is so exciting, you're not getting any of the real depth of emotion and understanding that we need to support business decisions and lead strategy. And that's really what he was about.
Kelly, from the buyer side?
Yeah, it's interesting because my I feel like right now market research is a little bit like taking your medicine. So we're always on the agenda. They'll always invite us in with, like the Xbox guy, and so they usually have this, and it's always me against the Xbox guy. How am I as cool as that guy? And I think the key in what we're trying to do is, yes, we need to add value, we need to be relevant, but we have to tell a meaningful story. We can't just throw up, and you made a lot of great points about that. You can't just throw up a bunch of data and expect to have people actually absorb it. You really do have to think more about storytelling and how not just what are the insights, but how are we actually communicating those effectively to business leaders.
You're all approaching relevance from the buyer side. How do we remain relevant to the industry, the people that are using the data? Turn it around. How do we remain relevant to those people that we need information from? Why aren't people participating in surveys? Why is it, when I see the number on my phone, I don't answer? How do you think, what's relevance from that standpoint? Are we relevant to people? Do they understand what the industry is about? Do they understand why they are so important and their information is the lifeblood of what we do?
Well,
How do we remain relevant to them?
My 25-year-old would say, no, you're absolutely not, because you are taking me offline, and I don't mean that literally, but you're taking me out of my life moment to ask me questions when I'm either not engaged in that particular situation or about topics I'm not interested in. So if you want to be relevant to me, research needs to be a lot more observational and learning about me as a person through ways other than asking me questions. And so I think that's one of our biggest dangers of relevancy, is that we're either reading things that aren't relevant to business decision makers, or we're not reading the right things.
I always think there's going to be a blend of, I go back to the why. So there's always, I think that our success will be our ability to blend active versus passive measurement, right? And I think that the extent to which we can ensure that the passive measurement doesn't take people out of the flow, I think you're spot on. I go back to your point, Andrew, which is that when we do ask questions, we ask with an eye towards engagement. Who's engaged? Where is it relevant? So you're not even though you might be taking quote unquote out of the flow, it's about something that is relevant, that is important, that they're passionate about. So
survey research reminds me of going to the dentist for a checkup. You get to the dentist, you sit down in the chair, you think, oh, it's the last thing I want to do. You spend all this time in the chair, you get up and you feel good. You feel like you did the right thing, you're moving on with your life. Research can't be like going for a checkup. It has to get to a point where we're not going to move to the other extreme and it's going to be like playing Call of Duty or some video game, but it does need to be more engaging. We need to find ways. I think my talk was about asking fewer questions, but also through better observation. To collect actionable data and to make this to be, when I get something in my inbox or in my Twitter or my Facebook that's asking my opinion, knowing I can impact the category I care about or something that means something to me, that switches up the motivation in a big way and makes it a lot more intrinsically motivated.
Now you're going someplace that I think is really important, because we talked a little bit about the how you collect the information, and is it in the moment, or are there a few questions and that kind of thing, but how do you get to that, get the consumer to understand the importance? I go back to Kim, the days when Procter & Gamble had a field staff of, I hate to tell you, but they were field girls. They went door to door, they wore pillbox hats and white gloves, and they asked questions of people in a very conversational manner. My guess is that, and it was a woman they were talking to because the housewife was at home at that point in time. None of this is meant to be sexual stereotyping. It is what happened at that point in mid-America. And I guarantee you that housewife talked to her husband when he came home that night and said, this nice young woman came to my door today and asked me about my laundry, and she cared about me, and she cared about what I did, and I was important, and my insights and what I told her was important. Wow, it was great to have that conversation with her. It really reinforced my value as a homemaker. How do we drive some of that into survey, or not survey research, but into insights generation today?
I was going to say that I think that the problem is that we end up like getting stuck in this idea of survey research. Like what we need to do is find more and more ways of getting beyond just observational, but gathering data as a part of the experience where you're giving immediate feedback to the people that are getting the information. So the dentist chair, that's a great example, but the problem is with survey research, you get up out of the chair and you feel exactly like you did, but you just went through this painful process. And you don't get that immediate kind of feedback that you actually need to say, this was at least something that was worth me doing. And I think focusing on how do we inject kind of research into kind of immediate feedback for those people that are giving the research, that they're getting something out of this. And that's, waiting 6 months for a new product to come out that maybe maybe they didn't have an influence on, doesn't really help them much.
I think it can be even easier than that. We're playing around with taking segmentations and putting them at the tail end of surveys, and then posting that to people's Facebook wall. So if I participated in a study about shopping, well, tell me what kind of shopper I am, and something that's almost share-worthy that I'm happy to share with my friends. Here's some proprietary data that I got through participating in research, and now I've learned something about how I compare to the population or to my peers, and that's interesting. I fill out, I'm embarrassed to say, Maxim magazine surveys about what kind of a bro I am. Those kinds of studies. My wife fills out the ones that are on her trashy magazine she reads. That people always have this sort of desire to understand how they compare to other people, and there's an interesting value driver that we can give back that doesn't take a lot of effort, but I think can pay big dividends.
I mean, we do that we run the Facebook polls where we run them on the site, and they're actually some of the most engaging content that we put on the site. We ask Obama's approval rating, right? Which is, instead of asking, somebody phoning up and asking you a question and takes you through this process, we just ask it, and what we do is we immediately give people the feedback of what the results are. They're unweighted, they're not perfect, and all that kind of stuff. But we give people that feedback, and they love that feedback, and it encourages them the next time when we ask them a question about are they going to attend a movie or have they heard of this movie. It encourages them to ask because they want to see what other people are saying about it. And it's positive feedback on it to answer the next question.
Doesn't it raise the question of whether or not we're moving away from something that used to be called research to the next thing? So if I want to engage that person out there, if I say I'm doing research, that's a turnoff in the absolute, right? You're putting me under a microscope. But if in fact you're allowing the engagement to happen so that you can learn about me and turn that learning into something that's of value not only for me as an individual but for manufacturers. So what is it that we are in then if it's not research? And I don't know the answer to that, but I think that'd be a good conversation to have today.
Eric, it would seem like Groupon can play in that because you've got that interaction with people they're buying something, they're obviously interested in something or they wouldn't be clicking on that to take advantage of the offer.
Absolutely.
Is there something there that we can build on?
To add what you were saying, it's the people are very engaged. We have a very large pool to draw from, so we do quite a bit of research. We try and stay in touch with our user base, and we try and make it not like a trip to the dentist chair, but try and engage them in a way of saying, listen, we're interested in your feedback, never say research in it, and your thoughts will help us drive to a more personalized, better experience for you. And really high participation rates, and we also try and be very respectful after years in the business. We never do a survey that's going to be over 10 minutes, generally more like 5, and try and have a lot of intelligent branching, so we'll never burden people with, oh God, I already answered this, or another horrible grid, those types of things. And yeah, it seems to work out.
Yeah, I think that one of the challenges that I've had this general conversation about, gamification or of interviewing based on passion points with a couple of folks, both in my organization as well as outside, and oftentimes it moves to this issue of not just what is research, but what is representativeness, and that's when you start to really feel the tension of kind of the old school sampling frames. And again, I don't know what the answer is, but we're moving into a discussion and dialogue about, in making it relevant, what challenges do we have about making it representative? And is that a legitimate question? How do we frame that? How do we talk about that? Because, whether we like it or not, this kind of quick iteration, lose a few but win a few is the nature of our industry and of our clients. I mean, that's how our clients are making decisions. So to your point about, I want something quick, and because I can always iterate and change, I better get something, because if you don't give it to me, I'm going somewhere else.
This past fall, I wish I knew who to attribute this to, but I read online, somebody talked about, we're going to fandom sampling from random sampling. What does that mean? I think that kind of plays into what you're talking about, David. Where do online communities and social media fit into your organization's search for insights, either research sellers or research buyers?
We have a number of tools that we have in the market that are focused on social communities and enabling understanding unique audiences across those. But we don't, we're not doing necessarily custom research in social today to any significant extent outside of a handful of direct partners where they're using our panel data to have a better understanding of how their social audiences are interacting across the internet on other applications, potentially competitive or otherwise.
We typically, with the projects that we do at Microsoft Advertising, we typically start with a certain amount of social listening because it just helps us kind of get an idea of what people are talking about out there, and also the language that consumers are using. Microsoft is famous for using crazy language internally, so it helps ground us in reality before we get started on a project. And then we use it to a certain extent, and I think we could probably be doing a better job and doing that even more when we're actually engaging consumers in sort of real-time response environments as well.
What about the seller side? Is it a part of your data collection or your information collection stream?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're in the business of community panels. We've got about 650 that are leveraging our platform, and we've been late to the party at eating our own dog food and really using this as a way to determine the features and services that we continue to leverage. What I will say though, what we are seeing as a trend is a lot of our customers are pulling in extreme amounts of social data on a weekly basis, and instead of jumping when a blogger says something that's scintillating or it's crazy, they'll actually weekly go to their community panel and do research and use that as a way to validate. So they're getting closer together. Those silos are there, but we're seeing that in some organizations, that willingness to say, hey, you've got a really interesting tool to very quickly get feedback on a variety of topics. If I'm in the warranty department of a car manufacturer, let's actually validate those on a weekly basis, so that way our CMOs are constantly getting different signals of how we should be reacting to what the market's saying.
We see a lot of people using their fan bases in order to understand, like, maybe what's a good marketing program to, kind of to your point, like how to kind of like kickstart the conversation, because those people are engaged with the brand already. So you can ask them questions like, what should I do? What should be my next promotion? Those kinds of things, and then they push that out to the wider community. I think that's one of the real kind of research pieces that people are using fans for. I mean, there's also kind of the standard kind of value of a fan and all that, but that's more kind of for evaluating kind of the investment that they're putting into fans, rather than kind of how to use them for research.
Yeah, get back to the notion of building an insight ecosystem in which you align resources that you've got available to you for some of the issues that you need to tackle. And one channel or one tool isn't necessarily the panacea for everything, but it does provide that ecosystem to follow up on.
And I think one thing critical to the ecosystem is that if we go back to the point about silos, many of us, and more of us, will be using communities, but they're siloed either with the client or with a specific supplier. If we think about the richness that could be had if we were sharing those communities in appropriate sharing forums, I think there's a lot of power there that's just not tapped. So to one of your earlier points, Don, as we think about gaining efficiency, cutting out duplication and waste, this is an area that's really ripe for sharing, so that investment dollars innovation dollars can be put in other places.
David talked about it as being information stream agnostic. So I would guess that you would agree with that, that that's an important place to be.
Absolutely.
Do the others of you agree with that? And if so, how do we drive the industry, both the research buyers and the research sellers, to adopt that concept of being information stream agnostic?
I think we have to show the power of it. I think a lot of the reason people don't want it to be agnostic today is that they're trying to protect competitive advantage, protect IP, whatever it is. If you flip that equation and show the value and the really minimal risk to either jeopardizing your IP or your, other than privacy, which is something we all need to protect, I think there's just so much power there. We haven't demonstrated it in a way that I think is compelling enough yet.
And I also think the one thing I would say is that we continue to have information streams that aren't necessarily easily put together. I mentioned the big pharma client we've got, so that they expect that kind of integration to happen because they have the tool in place that they built, that they provide. I can go to clients and say, well, can you share with me everything? No, it's too much of a hassle. I got to get it from here. I can't do that. So I think part of it is a joint responsibility to create either platforms or opportunities for doing that. So even before we can show the value, we got to be able to put it together, and that is not always an easy thing. So it's one thing to want to be agnostic. It's another thing to be able to get those information sources and put them together.
When in fact it's a daunting challenge. It's not, it's almost impossible to do today. So as we think about those partnerships, what partners do we need to help with cutting down some of the barriers there? And I don't think we have all the right partners.
I think the way you get there is not by demonstrating through cost savings, through kind of fundamental, there's new insights that I'm going to get that are going to change businesses as a result of combining data versus I'm going to save $20 million because I don't have to create this panel across these companies. It's got to be billions of dollars. That's because the CPGs can go to market faster, or they can change how they look at insights and stuff.
And the delta is huge between the companies that the initiatives that actually get the love, where they want to combine a lot of different data sources together and get the big insight to make the big decision, and then the other side, thousands of people walking around making everyday big decisions based on small data points, or their one silo, or the fact that they hired someone to give them some insights, so they talked to an analyst. We see that every day, that there's this huge delta between bad data giving you, or just a single source of one data from one reference point and using that to make decisions, versus spending all the time and energy, and time seems to be the biggest driver around that prevents you from combining a lot of data sources together to get at the right insight.
It is interesting, you talked about the challenge of bringing it together. Of course, the expense would be a challenge as well. But so here's the scenario. Kelly wants to understand something, and so she wants to integrate some community information from Andrew, some survey information from David, some online information from ComScore, let's throw Groupon users into this mix. Let's get some media data from Kantar. Let's get some Facebook information from Brad, and pull it all together to answer some, circle some question, a 360-degree view of some issue. I think that's data agnostic. Or information stream agnostic.
My customers are asking. I have to be agnostic. I don't just talk about Bing. I'll talk about Google too. So I'm expected to be. This is what consumers are doing. They're doing stuff on more than just Microsoft platforms. But I would love to have access to more data points to bring that together.
Well, I think that I think most of the companies would love to be able to share the depth of information that they have. But in certain cases, there are privacy issues. So it's not an issue of not being willing to share. It's an issue of the rights they have to that data and how it can be used. And so I think that not only are there these kind of competitive challenges, there are also privacy challenges. And it comes back to how do you work with the end consumer in a way that they have an incentive to share more broadly.
Yeah, and that's where that industry collaboration, I think, comes in and ties back to the question we asked before about being relevant to the consumer, so that they realize the value of sharing information, that there's benefit to them, and somehow minimizing the risk, such that they're open and willing to permit you to share information across to make their life in some way better.
And we're not, the other thing is that we need, it's not just about our willingness to share and if we've assuaged our concerns about privacy rights, okay. Not the bottom line, but an additional important component there is what is the framework for integration? You know, I think just kind of throwing sources together and see what sticks on the wall isn't what's going to deliver the value. It's not going to deliver kind of game-changing relevance to the business. We're going to have an organizing framework. Otherwise, we're going to drive each other crazy
Right.
trying to figure out what's there and how to do it.
Maybe we need to just get to be a part of the conversation that the CIO has been having with the big BI vendors and suppliers that are being leveraged more and more, which are mostly just taking, whatever data they're getting from, the behavioral side of their system, and they're combining those together. You read a lot of articles about matching up industry available data with behavioral data, building the right algorithms, and being able to have very cool predictive models. I mean, maybe we need to be at that table in a significant way with a big C-level champion saying, we're missing an important element of the mix here. And if we keep looking at just the rearview mirror of what our customer's done, we're never going to truly be able to cross over and maybe achieve that next level of insight.
I mean, I think to show how hard this is, like look at TV and online. And like we don't have a consistent standard, and we're starting to get there with VCE, we're starting to get there with OCR, but that's just a very simple measure versus true understanding across consumers, across all the media that they're consuming, and that could in theory be measured by one or two companies, and we still can't bring even that data together. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a great goal. I think it is a lot harder because of comparability, because of the interest that maybe research companies have. But I think it is a really hard challenge. I think we have to get there, but it's going to take kind of a paradigm shift probably to get there certainly from where we are today.
And it's going to take the right people. So David talked about insight architects. What new skills then are needed for the industry, and what should we be telling the industries, or telling the universities rather, to teach and the HR departments to seek? What has to change in that regard to get in the direction of insight architects?
I think you talked about a lot of it in some of the bits and pieces of what was shared today, and that's not using some of the old school methods of we went out, we did a study, and here are the results, and now I'm going to show you some graphs, and I'm done. But pulling in relevant content, both from that warehouse, and some of that is doing more than just being the research geek and going about doing your little role, and actually working and collaborating with the people up front, and really pulling in all the information. So you go back to telling a story, and you're able to integrate it and make it relevant and make it actionable. And I think that's where so much of that falls down. And without getting on a rant here, I've been doing internet research specifically for the internet space now for 15 years, and it just moves so quickly that a lot of the things that we're talking about, yeah, it's great. I'd love to have all these kind of collaborative things. The reality is, it moves so fast that most of the things that we think of as traditional research by the time I would end up doing something like that, it's obsolete, it's old news, we're on to something else. So the challenge in my position has always been to be able to keep up with the pace that the business decisions are happening and to make it relevant and to give them actionable information. So that's kind of a rant, but if I was talking to a graduating class of young researchers, that's what I would say is move fast and learn how to compress while still keeping the integrity of the business, because the other side of that is there's so many pseudo researchers out there that are like, oh, I figured out how to use SurveyMonkey, so now I'm running surveys out there. And it's like, oh, God. And I have to go around all the time and say, bad research is worse than no research, because you run around thinking you've got the right answer, and all you've been doing is polling the choir. And every time you turn to the choir and say, how are we doing? They're going to look back and say, you're great. And then you end up running down one path, whether or not that's really what is the actual answer.
I think you're going to see more and more people coming from artistic backgrounds getting into research. Dave mentioned this need to humanize data. For every 2 researchers you hire someone that understands and is good at visualizing data. I totally agree. The day of the big PowerPoint deck or looking at reams of crosstabs, maybe that's great in the insights department, but if you want someone 5 steps removed to be actually leveraging that data in their everyday life, they'd better have an easy, meaningful way to digest that data and to be wanting to share it or take action because of it. So I think that's going to be a real interesting. When I know you've already made steps, I think I read a release about Cantor having a creative director on staff, and GFK making steps to make sure that you're continuing to push that forward. But I think that's just going to continue.
I would even take it further. I want a day where we're not even looking at crosstabs. That what's happening is that the individuals that are constructing those insights, that are looking at those relationships, are able to pivot quickly because it's all about speed, it's all about compression, it's all about having an idea of what needs to be answered. And I think part of that comes from having frameworks in place so that you're not reinventing the wheel every day, with a new survey. What you're doing is you're pulling and calling from different information sources, and different sources may be relevant for different issues. So I'm gonna pull from these and mine these areas as you're talking about doing it before you launch into an insight or a learning agenda. It's that kind of capability, which means we need to move away from exclusively look, and it would be a little severe or drastic. We're going to move away from simply identifying individuals with strong deductive reasoning who are facile with numbers, and move to individuals that take a broader perspective, that look at relationships and look at the connections and visualize those kinds of relationships. That's, I think, where we need to look. So it's not necessarily the social sciences or the hard sciences. We look at art. We look at other avenues that have those skill sets.
I agree with that, and I think a little bit of the struggle here is that there are evolving roles and skill sets yet to be defined. So as we think about what you're describing, those really are the futuristic roles, and I think we could have a huge influence on what those people look like. They are people who are very agile with data, but they also they see the art and science behind data. They can architect it. Data scientists are supposed to be all that's the big career for the next 10 to 15 years. Well, what's a data scientist? A lot of that's yet to be defined, so I think it's all around that. People who are much more analytically capable than probably any of us. We just weren't exposed to those kinds of opportunities or didn't have the proficiency to do it. So it's a big, big area.
And we started an initiative around the talent of tomorrow, literally because I don't know where to find them. I mean, we have to really start thinking about, and to your point, shaping it, because it's not readily apparent where there's a steady stream.
And there aren't college programs that have their arms around this either, so influencing the educational institutions around this need.
And I think it's a lot about people, and it's about finding great people. And if I were to say what's the word or the 5 words that people would describe the research industry, I guarantee none of them would be sexy. Except maybe people on the panel.
Yeah. He's got a bar app.
Right.
I mean,
but when you think about how do we attract people to Facebook? How does Google attract people? How do you get the best people and the people that are going to be going to come up with the inspirations of the next ideas? It's by making it a little bit sexy, and that's all the way going back to in college and universities and trying to make it hip to be a part of that. And being a backroom researcher is just not that exciting. What we need to do is kind of bring it out front and make it more than about doing research, but about really kind of changing how marketing is done, how people are influenced, and make it sexier. Then we get the best people, and we will come up with new ideas. When you put great people and kind of really innovative people on projects, they come up with brand new ideas.
Well, I would suggest this is one that we need to collaborate on, to work across the industry to define what that future looks like, what those people need to look like, or else we'll have, as Kim said, which was the market research industry will get reinvented from the outside. We need to reinvent it, and it kind of starts with people. The old Procter & Gamble saying was always, take the company away from me, but leave my people, and I'll rebuild it in, I forget what the number of years was, 5, 10 years or something. But I think that's true. It's all about the people, and maybe that's a place for us to start collaborating.
Getting the comp models right so that we attract the right talent and can retain it.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Let's go out here. I hope that the last 35 minutes gets you thinking about questions that you want to add and build on. Yes?
I actually have a question that picks up on this most recent discussion. I totally get the idea for better data visualization, more storytelling, all of that kind of thing. But it seems like, as currently practiced, that often loses a lot of subtlety in the data, and even to the point of sometimes misrepresenting the data, if you think of like proportions being distorted and that kind of thing. So I'd be interested in thoughts about how we get the benefits of storytelling and data visualization without losing nuance and without losing accuracy.
So I can tell you what we're trying to do, and we'll see exactly how successful we are. We're actually working with our sales teams, our account management teams, a lot of people in the organization to really get them to understand what the results are. Not the thing that's on the PowerPoint slide, not, okay, this is a good number, I love showing the client this number, but understand the why and why it's more than, as I was talking about, it's more than the ROI, why actually the data that sits behind there is how you're going to make the next campaign better, and to pitch that as the idea, not just that the ROI kind of checked the box, that it's actually a lot more than that, and that the insights is how they're going to get the next sale, not just kind of focused on you did a good job on what you ran in the past. And it's about training our sales force to be a lot more analytical as well.
I think one of the challenges, or when I've seen nuance get lost, or when we've seen those kinds of issues, it's been trying to pack too much information on particular slides. So I think it's in many respects about chunking, it's about context, and it's about working together, that what you're not trying to do, it's not about dumbing down. I mean, it's one thing I want to come back to. It's really about creating a clear and simple connection or a specific insight that you can represent. And yes, you could have a whole back page with a list of caveats about the nuance of the issue, but fundamentally, are you getting, is this related to this and why? As a simple example.
Yeah, we're observing the two-pronged approach with our clients, where they're still doing the sophisticated analysis and doing the thorough analysis and presenting that. At the same time, they're taking the key findings and they're pushing those. And and whether that's someone that is 7 steps removed from the C-suite that normally would never be leveraging data or even paying attention to some statistics around our customers or decision criteria that we've made as an organization. Being able to empower those individuals with information they normally wouldn't be digesting is a big win. But you're right, you can't only do that. I think you can miss a lot of nuances if you get carried away in just the single message.
And one thing to think about, after many years of experience in this field, nuance is lost in many ways, not just through data visualization and some of the emerging sciences that we have. But if I think about how a lot of data gets reported overall, we lose the nuance that's actually represented in the understanding of one human being and the voice behind that. So we're doing a lot of experiments with marrying up different lenses, if you will, taking maybe a research study, coupling that with some interviews where the the client's words can come through of that individual human being. So I think of this as a big challenge, not just in the data visualization route.
Yeah, I think you go to the other end of the process, perhaps to look for an answer as well, and that is you've got to make sure, as always, you're defining what's the issue you're trying to solve. What are you looking for? And the more clarity you drive on that end, the more clarity there'll be on the other end. And really, data visualization is just another way to think of the one-page memo to some degree. How do I distill all this learning into something that you can act on? And it's never going to encompass everything you learned. There has to be some focus there, but it's a great question. I think we had a question right there.
Hi, my name is Veronica Balakhvastova. I am from PayPal. I head the customer analytics team there. And first, let me compliment you on a wonderful panel, so really enjoyed this presentation. And second, I wanted you to expand on the point that several of you made around market research becoming a little bit obsolete and a little bit too slow for the fast-changing landscape, especially in the payments industry for PayPal. We're seeing lots of competitors entering the space. And besides social networks and getting that real-time feedback from your customer, what other tips and tricks would you recommend to companies around making market research actually relevant?
Well, I'll jump into that a little bit because it's something that it's an interesting internal battle that I often have to fight because we get a lot of pressure to do gigantic studies that take a long time. And then by the time we get them out, our salespeople are, Kelly, this is so old, I can't do this. So what we're advocating for is shorter surveys done more frequently. And also, and I think you made this point, but also when we come up with a framework that's sticky and that works, we don't just throw it out the window the following year. So Meet the Screens, we did that piece of research 2 years ago, but we're continuing to iterate on it. We're continuing to find new things to go deeper on, and that keeps that conversation fresh, and it also enables us to take that framework and move it in the direction that the world is going. So I've done new versions of that research probably every 3 to 6 months over the past 2 years, and that really keeps it relevant for our teams, and it also kind of ensures that we're not, again, the tablet's changed significantly in this amount of time, so it ensures that we're not missing anything big and starting to talk about something that's no longer relevant.
It's not just re-education, but building on that knowledge.
Right.
And so you don't have to take your sales staff and just re-educate them on something completely new.
Exactly, and frankly, we don't have the budgets to reinvent the wheel every year either. So when we can actually get some efficiency by taking a piece of research and going deeper in one specific area, that's much more effective for us.
I would think about what other data sources you might have access to within the company as well. You may be doing this, but there may be a significant amount of advertising data related to your campaigns that you're buying, that your agency may have or that you may have internally, that you may not be using to have insight into how users are interacting with your brand outside of your own site.
I think let's go
to the fourth row here in the middle.
Yeah, I'm just going to add one more thing.
Okay,
Speed is also not without context. That is, if you speed it up and you put that information out, where is it playing in the value chain about decisions, and is it positioned? Because you could speed it up, but if it's still not, having a seat at the table and impacting the decision. So part of it is in identifying how to go to market quicker. It's what juncture point is it going to be in there, and what impact is it going to have, or what should it have?
We've seen clients boxing up offers, and so being able to say to your internal customers, okay, there is a really fast option that can give you feedback tomorrow on, and there's also, the further scenario which allows us to do a lot more analysis and really dig into the issue you're having, and being very clear with that internal customer about your relevance and ability to stay at the table and give them what they need. But you're right, consequences come with speed sometimes.
Good morning. Thank you very much for a very interesting panel and presentations. My question is really going to be sort of a stream of consciousness. Because first of all, I want to definitely acknowledge the value and incredible insights obtained from observational analysis or observational data gathering, as well as dialoguing with your customer. However, I have a couple of concerns about that, in the sense that there's a lot of privacy issues, and not to pick on Facebook, but obviously there's great concerns with that data mining and how users' data is being utilized, which then leads to sort of a discriminatory aspect, which is those who don't want to engage in those platforms that do really dig into your personal data. And Andrew, to your point, a single social authentication, well, there's a whole lot of information that people may not be willing to share, myself being one of them, which then leads to those who you are hearing from are the fandoms versus the random sampling. So, and also cultural or perhaps technological barriers, which then leads to scalability. So from an advertiser standpoint, or looking at the small sampling that you're getting from this very specialized audience, how is that scalability then applying to, we bring it back to advertisers or advertising, and how are those opinions influencing the direction that products are being created, brands are advertising, and in terms of the earlier talk about customer service, how is all that impacting and being able to speak for a very large population from a very small population of data providers.
So I actually think this ties into the last question a little bit. I think the challenge for the industry is there's, sorry, maybe I'm using the wrong terms, but it goes back to where I grew up. It's the concept of revealed preference and stated preference data. So when we look at observational, it's revealed preferences that people are buying these products based on the choices that they had in front of them, or the stuff that they may be posting on Facebook. And so that kind of observational data, as you point out, it definitely has biases in it, and using it entirely is not, it may lead you down the right path, but it's really important to understand what are the biases that exist there. And so there's still a need to be looking at kind of panel-based solutions, or looking outside that, so that you understand the biases that exist in the data. When I look at kind of the research industry and the way it moves fast is to understand the biases that exist in any particular data set, whether it be Facebook, whether it be any sort of observed data set, and then being able to really use research companies to correct those biases that exist, so that you can quickly get data back, and then you can get it back quickly, but you're able to correct it because you have these kind of standard sort of correction mechanisms. That's how I kind of see the industry playing out. That kind of is a mix between being able to use all the data, but still not like kind of ending up being biased by the only observations that you're able to see.
It's a great, maybe I think it'd be interesting to hear Joel talk at lunch about political polling, because we don't live in a world of random anymore. There is no such thing as random. We're a long way from the 80s where you pick up the telephone and someone interrupts you at dinner and asks you some questions. So you're either in fandom or you're an opt-in, extrinsically motivated survey participant. And I know there's been a lot of interesting work done in political research that a lot of us from a consumer perspective have taken cues from to remove bias.
I come back to the earlier point about the balance of representativeness versus the engagement, and I think that's a dialogue we need to continue to have, because I don't feel like we've got some clarity on it. I mean, I appreciate that we can probably correct for some of that, but what's the blend, and what's our tolerances, and what are we giving up, or what are we gaining from that? So I do think that's a dialogue that we as a industry need to continue to have as we go forward, because if the idea of pure representativeness starts to go away as people become increasingly disinterested in the specific topics or the questions that we're asking. So you're left with, okay, I might be, factually try to get representativeness, but in practicality, am I? So.
Yes. Hold on 1 second, Jeremiah.
So the refrain about PowerPoint can't be in a PowerPoint. We hear that a lot. People want to go beyond that. I actually used to work at Added Value, and we did some really great data visualization work there. We had designers and data and insight architects. It often ended up, though, in a PowerPoint. And we did a lot of experimentation about different forms of deliverables. I'm wondering if any of you can speak to some specific examples of wins you've had in going beyond the PowerPoint that really did achieve that.
We've done, so I'll give you an example for a large hospitality chain. We've developed a solution, a back-end solution, in which we literally had our data visualization team work on. So it pulled in not only the information that we were collecting, but also additional information or KPIs that the company or the client was collecting as well. It's created, as we understood what their action planning was against the information, we were able to design those deliverables such that they could see that almost in real time. So it's a move away from a PowerPoint and an understanding of the decision framework, and then designing to that decision. Now, granted, it was not inexpensive because it was bespoke to that client. But if you think about that process and you think about taking it to others, then you do start to get to a point of scalability, I think.
I have a point of view that PowerPoint's been unfairly singled out and maligned. if you get underneath at what clients are asking for, and I think what we feel responsible for, is a way of communicating research, data, insight, knowledge in a way that can be remembered, engaged in, acted on, and is much more provocative than what the traditional PowerPoint was. So as I look at the work that we're doing in Kantar, certainly data visualization is a big part of it. That's not really new. Added Value was doing it before its time. But it's more about how you take that insight into action and influence strategy. And I think it can be in PowerPoint format just very well. It's all about how you use it and how you communicate it. So for me, it's more about the communication, the strategic influence, and what you try to accomplish with however you're communicating.
We're playing around with integrating with social CRM tools, so things like Chatter and IBM Connections and Yammer, and giving executives the ability to sign on to research streams. So instead of me proactively going out and looking for research, saying, I want research to come to me. So anytime research is being done on this specific customer, in this region, on this segment, on this competitor, I'd like to make sure that I get a copy of that. As long as obviously from a data hierarchy perspective or organizational hierarchy perspective, you have the right level, then you can get access to that information. And so, how that works, we don't know yet. We're just experimenting with it. But I do see that being this important part of that wave. And when we look at the emergence of things like social CRM, these technologies that are taking away research budget, the way to put it back in there is to show that we have a seat at that table as well.
Let me look at all of you and say, look at your notes, and where in your note this morning did you have a question mark? Or no, I just disagree with that. I don't agree with that point at all. What was that point? And who do you want to challenge there? There's got to be something in your notes where you said, I just don't think that's right at all.
I think it's a whole lot easier said than done to be a research partner instead of a vendor. Okay, I mean, I think we all like to call ourselves our research partners, but how do you go about doing that? And it rang a little false to me. Same thing with data visualization. It's a lot easier said than done.
Well, I'll take that first. I think one of the ways you move from supplier or vendor into research partner is that you're much more proactive with the client's business. And what I mean by that is that, one, you feel accountable for their business growth as much as your own revenue growth. And that plays out then by being very proactive in what you bring to that client, what you offer to do for them, and putting your own skin in the game. So if I look at some of the success stories within Kantar across our operating companies, it's moving up from ask and answer and really stepping up to be a partner. Now, what that also implies, though, is that the client, the buying side, has to be willing to see that partner as a 50-50 partner, and that often is not the case. They often, and P&G is one of the ones that's doing this as well, we fall back into our old ways of behavior. So I think this is a learning opportunity for both buying and selling side to think about what's in a partnership. And because of the 10-minute deadline, I didn't get into all of my final points there, but it's about sharing a vision, sharing goals, creating win-win, and having it not be so much about pressuring price down and building revenue from the supply side. It's more about where's the win-win and growth for both sides. So I think it's about looking at the equation of what a partnership truly is. Think about a marriage, for example. It's give and take, and we don't have enough give and take in the relationships that we've got formed today. And I think that's something that this group could actually influence quite a bit, is to think about what those partnerships are for the future. It does take proactivity and skin in the game on both sides.
And I think from my perspective, transparency as well. So I want if I really truly have a partner, and I do have some people that I consider fantastic partners, I want to know if we're barking up the wrong tree. I don't want them to just take my money and come back with something that's not actually going to be useful to us. I want them to challenge me and say, hey, that's not going to work. Let's sit down and talk about what you really want and how we can figure this out together.
Thank you, Alice. Question back here.
Just building on that for a second. Being a brand
Hold
marketer.
on a second. Go ahead now. It's on.
Okay. Being a brand marketer for many years, I was just wondering if you've had more successes at the brand side at CPG companies, for example, as bringing in the marketers as part of your partnerships. And I've seen that where it's worked quite well at Kraft Foods, for example, where we've worked with the research partners and our research counterparts, but also bringing in the brand managers on it. And I just wonder if anybody had any comments on that.
Well, I think that's an important point, and as I look at trying to think about the business model and the revenue models differently from supply side, it necessitates looking beyond just the research partner to marketing, sales, media. It's a much broader base. With that being said, our liaisons are more typically the market research people, and so it's figuring out how to create the partnership with all of those internal functions so that you're creating value and you're creating trust. The transparency comes, you're actually sharing visions and goals in a way that help create that win-win. But I certainly think as we look at the spending picture, the revenues I put up earlier, we've got to think about the various opportunities within the client companies to help them, but also to think about where the dollars flow.
I'm going to take us to a close here. Is there a last comment, something that occurs to one of the seven of you that you'd love to mention before we pull you off the stage?
I think being in San Francisco is interesting in that we're in this, we're in the tech hub, and if you look at, and I'm more of a technology-oriented person than a market researcher. If you look at, what Mark Benioff's done very quickly with the marketing cloud, buying two companies and and moving into a space where they're investing in marketing automation, they're investing in a lot of tools around marketing. It is a foregone conclusion that I think you will see in the future the Insights Cloud. You will see more of these large-scale companies that are geared around employees, around better ways to communicate and engage your customer, and that are starting to wake up to the whole voice of customer reality, is that they're going to be in our kitchen. They're going to be in our kitchen on our terms or on their terms. It's a big bridge that they have to build to cross to get there. I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow. I don't think it's going to happen next year. But I do think in the near future, we're going to see that reality. And we all have an opportunity to help shape that and ride that wave and make that an exciting journey, and not make that something where we're going to kind of shiver in the corner and wait for the inevitable to happen and to be rendered obsolete, or see market research automation come into play. So I think it's interesting times for us.
I want the bar app, that's all.
All right, this has been great. I appreciate all of you. Several of the panelists will be here for the rest of the day, so you'll be able to interact with them. Think as well about the questions that we talked about your notes. We'll be breaking into breakout groups later on today, and we encourage you to bring your thoughts to those breakouts, because then we'll bring that information back up here to the stage. So in terms of where are we in the agenda, I've got to find my notes here that Rachel has so helpfully provided me.